Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own All That Remains or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by TrueFreak89, and you can find a link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by Angela.
All That Remains, Chapter 6. Alone with Anacostia on her way to Alder's office, Rael asked what was going to happen to the civilian who left her for dead. "That's up to Alder. He could be executed," Anacostia said, glancing sideways at Rael as the young woman's expression fell. Rael was a healer through and through, and the older woman could see how heavily that possibility weighed on her heart. "Sure enough," Rael said, "I don't want that." Anacostia shrugged as they reached Alder's door. "It's out of your hands, caller. Alder might want to make an example. Our numbers are low as it is. Going easy on an attack from within sets a bad precedent." "I get that." Rael caught Anacostia's arm as she reached out to knock on Alder's door. 2 years ago she would have thought twice about it, but they'd come a long way since basic. "But all of our numbers are low, civilians included. I don't want some man killed in my name." "I'll take that into account, Private Caller." Rael took a step back, letting go of Anacostia's arm and ducking her head as Alder's door opened and she appeared at the doorway, scrutinizing both women in front of her with hawk-like eyes. "But I need to do what is best for the base. Law and order is needed now more than ever." "Yes, ma'am," Rael agreed, feeling her cheeks grow hot at being caught out at Alder's door. The general ushered them both into her office, where the biddies were gathered around and clicking their tongues at Rael's insolence. Alder took a seat behind her desk, leaving Rael and Anacostia to stand. She motioned for the biddies to fall silent, then steepled her fingers as she leaned forwards, bringing her chin to rest on them. "I'm glad you're safe, Private Caller. So many of our young women did not survive the fall of Fort Salem. How did this civilian, Max Fisher, come to believe you were dead?" Rael shifted from one foot to another, her hands clasped behind her back. "We disturbed the nest. When we were running for the exit, he pushed me aside," Rael admitted. "I fell and he left me for dead." Alder's eyes darkened, like a storm was brewing in them, and when she spoke, her voice was strained. "His charge will be upped to attempt murder." "No, please!" Rael caught herself. "Please, General, I ask you to show him mercy." Alder sat back in her chair, her lips pursed. "I can't let something so serious go without punishment." She looked hesitant, but she was still listening. Rael took that as a good sign. "I'm not asking for him not to be punished, General. I just don't want his death on my conscience." To Rael's surprise, Alder agreed. She sat forward again, placing her hands on her desk. "You're right. This man's actions have already had enough of an impact on your life. He will be punished, but he will live. On a happier note, you found ample supplies and survivors. 6 people. That's more than we've found in months. Well done." "Thank you." Rael didn't correct her that one of the survivors had technically found her. Alder gave her a curt nod. "You're an asset, Rael. You've already done so much, not just for your country, but for me personally. Your mother will be proud." Rael bit down on her tongue. Her mother was dead because of Alder and her accord. Stella's words seemed to be playing on repeat in her head as Rael stood before the general. Alder signed all their lives away, yet she got to live for over 300 years. How many witches had died in Alder's place? It wasn't fair. Rael hadn't felt this way in a long time. Scylla had picked at an old wound, opening it up to fester. She squashed the feelings down. Rael couldn't afford to think like that, least of all in front of Alder. The general thanked her again and dismissed her with a wave of her hand. Go have a shower and a hot meal. Take a few days off. You've earned it, Private. Rael nodded and stamped her feet in salute. She turned to leave, but paused at the door as she felt a tug on her pant leg. Opening the door wide, Rael turned back to face Anacostia. Thank you for coming for me, Lieutenant. You don't have to thank me, Private. Anacostia dismissed her. Rael felt a tug on the back of her jacket this time and quickly excused herself. She closed the door behind her and walked down the hall before looking around and coming to a stop. Kali, you can come out now. A few steps ahead of her, a young girl appeared out of nowhere. The 10-year-old gave her a cheeky smile as Rael chastised her. What have I told you about snooping on Alder? But I wanted to see you, Kalita frowned. They said you were dead, but I knew you weren't. Coming from any other 10-year-old, Rael would have scoffed. But Kalita was no ordinary kid. She and her brother were Tarim, the last of a nomadic culture that possessed knowledge of songs and seeds that hadn't been heard in centuries. If Kalita said she knew Rael was alive, then Rael believed her. Where's Adil? Rael asked, falling into step with the younger girl as they headed towards the military living quarters. Kalita skipped along beside her. He's in the garden, she answered in a sing-song voice. You shouldn't be snooping, Kali, and you should be in school. I don't like it, Kalita replied dismissively. It's boring and I've read everything. Did you get me a book? I did, Rael smiled despite herself. She'd picked up a handful of books at the supermarket and stashed them in the bottom of her backpack. Come with me to my dorm. It's in my pack. Kalita took Rael's hand and went with her to the unit's dorm. Abigail and Tally were already waiting in the dorm when Rael and Kalita walked in. Abigail hugged the little girl. You should be at school, Missy. I wanted to see Ray. I knew she was coming back. She has a book for me, don't you, Ray? I sure do. Rael dug into the bottom of her backpack and pulled out a copy of Alice in Wonderland. She handed it over to an excited Kalita, who took a seat on Rael's bed with it. Have you read that one yet? Kalita shook her head, already eagerly opening the book and devouring the first page with her eyes. She looked up after a moment. Thank you. No problem, Rael said. Do you want to wait here for our deal? Kalita nodded and went back to her book, curling up with it and turning her back to the girls. With Kalita distracted, Abigail asked how things went with Alder. Rael took a seat on the end of their bed with a sigh. I told her I didn't want the civilian executed. They're going to execute him? Tally's big eyes widened. She'd grown a lot since leaving the comfort of her matrifocal compound back home, but she was still naive in so many ways. Alder doesn't have much of a choice, said Abigail, playing the devil's advocate as the only High-Atlantic in the room. She held her hands up as Tally's whipped her head around to glare at her. I'm just saying, Alder needs to set an example to keep the peace. You might not like it, but you both know I'm right. Rael shrugged. She said she wouldn't, but I trust Alder about as far as I could throw her. She gave me a few days off, though, so there's that. I'm gonna take a shower and check on the family. I think you mean Scylla, Tally teased, the mood lightening as they changed the topic. No, that's not what I said, Rael rolled her eyes. Come on, we saw you under in the truck. She's hot, Abigail laughed, prodding Rael with her foot. Rael slapped it away. Okay, fine, yes, she's hot. She's pretty cool, actually. Kinda guarded, though. I think she might have had a bad experience with another camp. She wants to leave. I'm hoping to change her mind if I show her around the base a little. Starting with your bunk? Abigail corrected, nudging Rael with her foot again. Abs, get in the room! Rael jerked her head in Kalita's direction. She was still curled up on Rael's bed with her nose buried in their new book. Abigail tried to cover it. I just mean so you could read Scylla a bedtime story. Without looking up from the book, Kalita said, I'm 10, I know you're talking about sex. Abigail winced. Adele's going to kill us. Sounds like a you problem, Brielle laughed. Pushing herself to her feet, she walked over to her closet to fetch a clean towel and her bag of toiletries for the shower. With 2 days' worth of dirt and grime caked into her uniform and under her fingernails, she was in a desperate need of a long, hot shower. Swapping her boots for her shower shoes, Brielle said goodbye to Khalida and her unit and left for the communal bathroom down the hall. It was mercifully quiet this time of day, with most people already at work. Brielle slipped into an empty shower stall, pulling the curtain over behind her. She peeled off her grimy uniform and tossed it on the floor. 2 days out in the shit had left her caked in grime and dirt. Standing under the hot spray of water, Brielle let it wash away the last couple of days. She pulled the hair ties keeping her braids in and teased them out with her fingers. Leaning against the tiled wall, supporting herself with one hand, Brielle let the other slip between her parted legs as she thought about the one highlight of the last couple days. Scylla. Her eyes, her smile, her touch. Brielle closed her eyes over, letting thoughts of the other girl wash over her, warming her inside and out, more than the water ever could. The pressure inside her was building as Brielle touched herself, imagining it was Scylla's hand between her legs. She jumped, her eyes snapping open as she heard voices approaching, other people coming into the bathroom. Brielle stifled a groan with a hand at her mouth. She was still grinding against the other one when she came with a muffled cry. Brielle brought her head to rest against the tiled wall with a sigh. That had to be one of the worst parts of living underground with 300 other people. The lack of privacy. She cleaned herself up and finished her shower, wrapping herself in a towel and slipping her feet into her shower shoes before she grabbed herself and headed back to the dorm. Adil was there when she got back. He welcomed her home with a friendly smile. Hello, Brielle. It is good to see you back safe. Hey, Adil. Feels good to be back. Brielle dropped her uniform in the laundry basket in a corner of the room and hovered by her bed, waiting for him to leave so she could get changed. Adil picked up on her unease. We should go, Kali. Khalida looked up from a book and glanced at Brielle. You can take it with you, Brielle said, instantly putting a bright smile on the little girl's face. It's one of my favorites. Let me know what you think about it. I will, the little girl promised, tucking the book under her arm and taking hold of her brother's hand. Adil pressed a kiss to Abigail's cheek, promising to come see her later. Brielle changed into some fresh civilian clothes once they were gone. Tally offered to do her braids, so she sat on the floor in front of their bunks and let the other girl play with her hair. Abigail sat on her own bunk, filing her nails. So, do you want the room to yourself tonight? We can make ourselves scars, right, doll? She said, picking up right where they'd left off before Brielle left the shower. Right. Abigail, I just met her. Nothing's going to happen, Brielle scoffed. Why not? Asked Abigail. It's the end of the freaking world. Go for it. Yes, go. Tally slapped Brielle's shoulder and gave her a playful push when she was finished with her hair. Have fun and don't do anything I wouldn't do. That narrows things down, Brielle laughed as she pulled her on her favorite plaid shirt. Seriously, Ray? You're wearing that? Abigail wrinkled her nose as Brielle fixed her collar in the mirror, hanging on the back of the closet door. Ever heard of dressing to impress? Brielle flipped the other girl off, said her goodbyes to Tally, and took off for the family dorms on the level above. The entire base was a sprawling concrete maze set out over 3 levels. She took the nearest staircase up, bringing her to the dorms set aside for families and groups. The dorms were assigned in order, with only a handful still empty, so it didn't take Brielle long to find the one occupied by Scylla and the Robeson family. Someone, probably Hillary, had scribbled the family's name on the whiteboard that hung on the outside of the door. Brielle knocked and waited for an answer. Joe opened it moments later, a smile stretched on his wrinkled face. Brielle, come in, come in. He ushered her in with a hand at the small of her back. The dorm was a carbon copy of the one occupied by Brielle's unit, except it was larger and had a door that led to a private bathroom. There were 2 bunk beds on the far wall and a double bed by the door. The 2 children were busy bouncing on a double bed while the adults unpacked their meager possessions. Brielle greeted the Robinsons, making small talk and asking how they were settling in. But her eyes were on Scylla the whole time. She sat on one of the top bunks, her head buried in a book. The front cover was too beat up for Rael to make out what she was reading. "We're just getting breakfast. Would you like to join us?" Joe asked, tearing Rael's attention away from the other girl. "I'm good, thanks." She shook her head with a polite smile. Distracted by Joe, Rael didn't notice Scylla place her book aside and dropped to the floor. She jumped as Scylla's hand found her shoulder. "In that case, you can give me a tour, soldier girl." She walked past Rael and the old man, heading for the door without looking back to check if Rael was following her. "Sure," Rael called after her. She said her goodbyes to Joe and the rest of the family and rushed after the other girl. She fell into step with her halfway down the corridor. Scylla walked along carefree, with her hands stuffed into her pockets, like they were two people just out on a leisurely stroll, not hundreds of feet underground in a military complex and facing the end of the world. "So, what do you do for fun around here?" Scylla asked, bumping her shoulder into Rael's while towing the reflective yellow line running the length of the floor. It was a safety feature designed to lead to the exit in case of emergency. Well, there's the movie theater. There's usually 2 movies on a night and 1 in the morning for kids. Then there's the pool, Olympic-sized of course, and we have common rooms with TVs and game consoles. Oh, and ping pong tables. There's a whole league if you're any good. "This place sounds off the hook," Scylla said, sounding every bit as sarcastic as the smile she was wearing as she knocked her shoulders into Rael's again. "Oh, you haven't heard half of it. Wait until I tell you about the bridge tournament." Rael grinned, giving as good as she got. There was something about the other girl that kept Rael on her toes and made her feel safe at the same time. She liked her. Rael couldn't deny it. Scylla was a breath of fresh air in a world full of shit, and Rael was determined to get her to stick around for longer than a few days. "Can wait," Scylla laughed, linking her arms with the other girl. "Show me everything." The full tour of the base took over 2 hours. Rael made sure to show Scylla all the places of note, both civilian and military. This common room is technically for military personnel only, but if you're looking for a game of Texas Hold'em and some terrible hooch, this is the place to be on a Friday night. "I'll bear that in mind," said Scylla, running a hand across the back of a worn-out couch. The common room was the closest to Rael's dorm and where she and her unit spent most of her downtime. There were a few old leather couches inside, along with an 8-seater table for playing cards and a stereo in the corner. It wasn't much, but it was a place they could go to unwind and act like teenagers for a few hours. "This is all great, but I think you forgot to show me something." Scylla stood with her hands in her pockets, leaning against the poker table with an amused smile on her lips. Rael frowned. "I did? What?" Scylla's smile widened. "Your room." Rael had never been so grateful to walk into her dorm and find it empty. She didn't know where Abigail and Tally were, and she didn't care. "Here it is." She stepped aside to let Scylla in and watched as the other girl slowly looked around. "Which bunk is yours?" she asked, and Rael felt a lump in her throat. That one." Rael pointed at the bottom bunk. "Make yourself at home," she said as Scylla took a seat on her bed. "Comfy." The other girl smirked. She bent forward and untied her boots before slipping them off and drawing her legs up underneath herself. "What's this?" She pointed to the sheet hanging from one corner of the top bunk, tucked under Tally's mattress. "Privacy," said Rael, feeling Scylla's gaze burning into her as she rubbed at the back of her neck. "I hang it up sometimes. Sharing a room can take its toll, you know?" "Yeah," Scylla nodded, biting her lip as she leaned back on her elbows, making herself comfortable. "Why don't you hang it up?" "Oh, okay." Rael took the loose corners of the sheet, thanking whatever higher power was out there that her hands didn't shake as she tucked it under Tally's mattress. She took a steady breath before ducking under the sheet and joining Scylla on her bed. The other girl scooted back and sat cross-legged to give Rael space to sit. Rael mirrored her pose, crossing her legs underneath her as she nervously brushed her hair back behind her ear. Scylla was staring at the fairy lights tacked to the underside of the bottom bunk. and Riel suddenly wished the ground would open up and swallow her whole. They were a throwback to her old room back in the session, a home comfort that probably looked childish to someone like Scylla. The lights? They're cool. Can I see them on? Sure. Riel felt relieved as she leaned over the side of the bed and flipped the switch on. She was about to blame them on Tally, but Scylla seemed to like them. Her face lit up as the fairy lights cast a makeshift blanket fort in a soft blue light. I can see why you like the sheet up. We could be anywhere in here. Scylla sighed wistfully, touching one of the lights with her fingertips as a genuine smile spread over her lips. Riel nodded, biting the inside of her cheek. Sometimes I sit in here and pretend I'm still at home, in my old room, waiting for my mama to come home from deployment. She hadn't meant to say that last part, but Scylla was so easy to talk to. Things kept slipping out as if Riel had no control over her own mouth. Scylla turned her attention to the letters and postcards pinned to the wall. Some of the few possessions Riel had brought with her from Fort Salem. She ran her finger over a postcard, her smile gone, and replaced by an expression Riel couldn't quite fathom. My parents were killed, she said in a quiet voice, so low that Riel almost didn't hear her. Riel shuffled closer, her hand covering the one Scylla had resting on her knee. Scylla blinked slowly as if, like Riel, she'd said more than she'd meant to. She swallowed hard, her eyes fixed on the almost illegible cursive of Willa color. It happened before the infection. Riel could tell she was struggling. She squeezed her hand, reassuring her that she didn't have to keep going if she didn't want to. Scylla took the out Riel offered, with a strained laugh. Sorry, kind of a buzzkill, talking about my dead parents. Don't worry about it. Riel ran the pad of her thumb over the back of Scylla's hand. They locked eyes as Scylla turned her attention back to the girl in front of her. The insecurity vanished from her expression as she pushed down her grief and replaced it with her usual confident smirk, before tilting her head and leaning forwards to kiss Riel. Riel closed her eyes over and leaned into the kiss. Scylla pulled away first, and Riel opened her eyes slowly, as if dazed by the kiss or under some kind of siren spell. Scylla's eyes were alight with smug satisfaction at the obvious effect she'd had on the other girl. Well, two could play at that game. With a surge of newfound confidence, she cupped the back of Scylla's head and brought their lips crashing together again, kissing her like the world was about to end, as she moved forward, pushing Scylla onto her back beneath her.
Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.